in essence, our Declaration of Independence was, you're not a king, we're all kings.
Yeah.
Because all men are created equal before God.
Right.
There's not this divine right. You aren't born with this right. You get to
Over
rule
another
over
man,
me.
yeah.
And so that concept of divine right, which
So
plagued the world for millennia.
What are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
Monarchy, Season 2, Episode 9. Good to be back with you here in our podcast studios. I'm Doug Levesque with the Bible Nation Society. Good to have Tony Nash and Pastor Jason Georges with us here from Emmanuel Baptist Church and AZ Business Solutions, respectively. Thank you guys for coming back. We took a little hiatus in the middle of the season. We were also busy with everything, weddings and politics and the church and all 9 yards. But man, it was a great summer. We're glad to be back this fall. And I think everybody's going monarchy crazy. So I think it'd be good to just get back by talking about crowns.
Yeah. Isn't it weird? There's always a royal curiosity in there. I mean,
around the world. I mean, I think it's weird that it's America, but it's straight because the whole world's that way. You know, and so they talk about their realms, tongue in cheek.
Right.
At one point in time, they said, a quarter of the world was under the British Empire. The sun never set on the British Empire. And that's true. And basically, under Elizabeth, who does stand out as maybe being more virtuous in some regards. At least that's the appearance of that. We'll give her that. Since she took the throne in 1950, look at all the former empire nations that got independence, right? India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, even greater separation with Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And basically, with some sort of PR or whatever, she's beloved here in the United States, the royal family is beloved here in the United States. So
People
she
obsess
actually,
over it.
she was actually this person that said, okay, Hong Kong can have, a level of independency or whatever. And she kind of gave away the empire. And I found it interesting watching the funeral the other day that they marched in over Winston Churchill's grave in that church. And of course, Winston Churchill was all about the empire, restoring the empire. And he was prime minister 2 different times under her. And he wanted to restore empire to a certain extent. And of course, the empire was broke after World War II. And that was his unpopularity, is that he spent money and he had this pipe dreams. And I'm sure she would have liked to keep empire, but this idea of commonwealth, as long as my money's on the page and one of your highways is named after me and your parliament building still has the elements of English parliamentary concepts, et cetera, we'll call it the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
It's an empire in every other, concept.
Well, and I think especially with the British monarchy, there is this blended line between fantasy and reality.
Yeah, like
at what level is it Disney and the castle and the princess?
Exactly.
And at what level is it tyrannical monarchy or true monarchy? And it's somewhere in the middle, it kind of dissolves or it overlaps with each other.
I have this great quote that I found by James Fenimore Cooper. He's the guy that authored The Last of the Mohicans, 1826. And of course, that was over here in the United States, but there were colonialists who were trying to get independence. They didn't want to follow the crown. And in that book, the crown is trying to bring them to their war and their battle. And so you have kind of good and bad mix at his perspective of the British Army and British royalty, and kind of a good and bad mix between what these colonists were trying to get or whatever as well. And it's a masterful book, right? It's the 1992 movie, but book is always better than the movie, I promise, in this regard. But he, being a writer, writers were poets and philosophers, and he made this political statement: a monarchy is the most expensive of all forms of government, the regal state requiring a costly parade, and he who depends on his power to rule must strengthen the power by bribing the active and enterprising whom he cannot intimidate. So in other words, most people he's promising this lie to, right? Like, I'm coming again and my kingdom is like that sort of thing, the simple. And then those who had their own sense and their own power, he basically had to bribe. And I wanted to start off with this statement. What we see is a great bribe. It's a false promise of peace, security, stability, and greatness. The pomp is meant to be a wow factor, though couched in beauty and sentiment. It is, however, a lie told by weak men, demonically inspired, believed by weaker men, or tolerated and emulated by strong ones. God warns of any monarchy other than his own.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just a propositional thought. And I think it's definitely an American thought, because we're kind of raised at like monarchy schmonarchy. You know,
Right.
no king but King Jesus, and we rejected you before 1776,
Right.
you know. When in the course of human events, you have a king that you want to get out from under, we're going to let the whole world know we're getting out from under it because of his bad things. However, the Baptist story, as being, you know, Baptist, is that Baptists did have to look to the king for religious liberty, because the colonies under different religious patronage for different denominations oftentimes persecuted the Baptists more than the king did, or as much as the king did.
Yeah.
So Baptists had to make a decision. Are we going to be this American ideal? Are we going to sign up with these guys to fight? Or is the king going to help defend us? You know, Washington and Adams were great, but they really weren't fantastic when it came to religious liberty towards the Baptists. And they had to have their minds changed in that. Well, let's talk about the history of the monarchy, guys. Got to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's online. You don't have to buy 42 volumes at the door anymore. You know,
We
but
used to have one of those in our house.
we still have a couple.
We have a couple here at the church.
We had the Funkin' Wagnalls.
They're good for school kids. You know what I mean? To go looking at or whatever use.
I tried to explain to my kids what, you know, an encyclopedia was.
Wagnalls.
Well, just like you had to actually go in a book and look stuff up, not Google it.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
can't
and
even
you
wrap
had to
their
go to
minds
card
around it.
catalog. You know,
Right.
you had to figure that out. Yeah, but I just thought, okay, that's great, because the Encyclopedia Britannica is going to have a British perspective of the monarchy. But they say monarchy, a political system based upon the undivided sovereignty or rule of a single person. Now, that's not really even true in England, right?
Not anymore.
But we're going to say that's couched. Because they say, well, there's no power, but there is a power, and I'm going to want to show that today. Later on, functions of monarchs. Monarchy thus entails not only a political administrative organization, but also a court society, a.k.a. a class system. So there still exists a class system and a court society. When you look at all the pomp and circumstance, and you look at people and go, who are they, and what's that flag or whatever? It's a class society, and it's a court system.
Right.
You know? I like the history that they put forth. Infrastructural programs and state building also contributed to the development of monarchies. The need, common in arid cultures, to allocate fertile land, which is land ownership, and manage them, a regime of freshwater distribution, which is natural resources. This is Prince Charles, man, all the way. What the German American historian Karl Wittefogel called hydraulic civilization accounted for the founding of the ancient Chinese, Egyptian, and Babylonian monarchies on the banks of rivers. The monarchs also had to prove themselves as state builders, right? Build a tower. Okay, so when you look at modern monarchies, you're seeing the semblances of Babylon, right? And the reasons therefore. And so we're going to talk about Prince Charles in another session, but here's a guy who really can't make political statements. He really is not supposed to do that, right? Queen Elizabeth's dad actually got chastised by parliamentary heads for being a little bit overly political. This was pre-Hitler, right? Pre-World War II. So Charles has to kind of stay out of it, but what does he do? He makes these naturalistic, charitabilistic statements about direction of nature in the world and what is power and all this kind of stuff, and it's tolerated just enough. But he's invited to all the world political bodies, including the World Economic Forum, which we'll talk about. And Klaus Schwab introduces him, and he goes on to basically define what the Great Reset is and how, you know, as a king, I'm going to allocate land, the fertile land, and I'm going to manage the regime of fresh water and whatever else, solar, wind, you know, whatever else, food allocations even. And so, you know, while we say it has no power, it because it's always there and paid for, it's just waiting in the wings.
Right.
You know, all the monarchs, but it's just funny that everybody's all gung-ho when they see it. It's just so beautiful. It reminds them of the Disney film. And so the pomp and circumstances, the sentiment is kind of pretty. It touches our soul. But the devil knows what touches our soul, right? And ultimately, I like Fenimore Cooper's statement. It's a lie. It's a bribe.
Yeah.
And people are going to rethink it again. You know, it's not 1776 anymore. It's 2012. It's a different set of circumstances. Maybe we need more involvement on this level. You know, if it's always fluid, right? Then
well, and that's the danger of even this pseudo-ceremonial monarchy that we are seeing observed today, because it keeps the idea alive, and it keeps the movements of it alive, so that people would be ready to receive it again. Why don't we have, I know we're going to discuss a little bit, why don't we have a king?
Right.
Why don't we have a king? Because they see it modeled. The idea of kings, particularly the children of Israel, it wasn't an idea original to them. It was, we want a king like the world.
Yeah.
And we're going to get that to a little bit later.
And there's, I mean, there's biblical precedent in
Yeah.
this. And that's what Bible Nation Society is really about, is saying, what we're dealing today, there's biblical precedent, and it's nothing new.
Right.
And this is something that we've seen. So it's just trying to give us good discernment. Time Magazine, why America's founders tried to recruit a foreign prince to be their king, and how that moment holds a warning for today. And you got to remember, even under the Declaration of Independence and the workings of the Constitution, there were those in both parties that thought, let's have a king. Let's call the president His Majesty and make him a kingly, type of person. And when they had the Shays Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion and stuff like that, and Washington had to go and declare like authority that was questionable
Almost
whether
like
or not it was in there.
Where are you getting this from?
And right away, people were talking monarchy again. And so, listen, Washington was masterful in that he didn't take it.
Right.
He believed enough against that he did not take it.
Napoleon said of Washington, he's the greatest man alive today,
Yes.
because Napoleon realized he had everything that Napoleon desired,
Yes.
and he walked away from it.
Could have been. And today, so we have Washington, D.C., Washington State, Washington Monument, Washington. We have our own nascent
Right.
royalty cult of personality, for sure, that is Babylonian reflective, even in America. It just goes that way because of man.
But he was steeped in that idea, or he still came from the last vestiges of that Greek mythology, that life is not really defined by your breathing, it's defined by this legend that goes on.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
at the essence of Greek mythology, and
Right.
some of that, like, I'm going to live beyond my death.
Right.
And so Washington got his wish.
Yeah.
He is alive today
Absolutely.
in that sense, his idea. And
even in
whatnot.
a greater way almost than anything London. You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's more powerful or whatever. So, that's kind of the history of monarchy. It definitely, we can go to the scriptures and see all that history in there as well. But let's talk about problems with monarchy currently. Boy, it'd be nice to be able to interview people from countries that had monarchies. It was funny, at that wedding, you had Saudi royalty represented. You had the Japanese emperor there. You had all the other European dignitaries, the King of Spain, etc., the Queen of the Netherlands and Sweden. You had royal family all there, mixed in with presidents.
Because royalty recognizes royalty.
Yeah, absolutely.
In other words, even if we might be enemies on the risk board, but I have to defend your right to exist, or your existence validates my existence.
Yes.
So it behooves royalty to acknowledge royalty.
And why is it bloodlines? Why, think about it. Why is it
Houses.
bloodlines? Where are they talking about? I mean, is it breeding, like breeding horses and dogs, or is there something else there?
Well, that's the concept of this monarchy, of the divine right of kings.
Yes.
And so that divine right is passed by birth. And so, in essence, our Declaration of Independence was, you're not a king, we're all kings.
Yeah.
Because all men are created equal before God.
Right.
There's not this divine right. You aren't born with this right. You get to rule
another
over
man,
me.
yeah.
And so that concept of divine, which
So
plagued the world for millennia.
Yeah. So it was really biblical freedom and thought, and the ability to express it, and then own your own property, be the king of your own castle, so to speak, by meritorious work or blessing or luck.
Well,
that got you there.
Well, even to get theological here, it's the essence of the gospel that makes us in the individual priesthood of the believer.
There you go.
That allows us to then separate ourselves from
That mindset
that.
coming
Yeah,
in.
that king, that's what it is.
The other thing, there's this other strain, especially in Britain and Europe, that doesn't like the monarchy, but not for those reasons. They don't like it because of secularism.
Right.
Yeah.
And so secular humanism takes down any divine right, takes down any elitism, takes down any bloodlines as well. So, but whatever one of those wins against it, it's just going to reset its own monarch. On one respect, Jesus. On the other respect, some other man or some other chosen thing. And a guy like Charles could be savvy to that on both sides, play both sides against the middle, because what is the job of a monarch today? Just stay in power.
Right.
And that's why all the
That's
other
it.
events, they've been so successful. What have they been successful at? They're not really ruling. Staying in power, keeping the storyline, keeping the lights, keeping people still paying for it. I heard one statistic that said, of all the citizens of Britain, and I don't know if this was Britain or the Commonwealth or whatever, that every person pays an annual sum of 14 to 15 cents to support the monarchy. And yet, when they started looking at Charles' individual wealth, he has wealth way beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
He owns properties around the world. Has something else is going on there, and that's why he's in trouble, because he created this British monarchly charity, but he's receiving cash from Arab government officials, running it through the charity, and where did it go? What was
Which is a wonderful example of what profits a man if he gained the whole world. Because here's a man who already has the world,
Sure.
but it's not enough.
Yeah.
I got to get more wealth. I got to have more wealth because the unsatisfied soul will never be satisfied
Yeah. Yeah.
in earthly things.
So I liked Rutgers University had this great article, after Queen Elizabeth's death, will the monarchy continue? So, I mean, we're in America, but we're still consumed with that. And it was kind of a question-answer thing, but here was one question. What power did the Queen have, and will her successor continue to have the same power? Here's the response. The monarch's constitutional powers are in practice rather limited, although they still have significant symbolic importance. It is interesting that among the Queen's final public duties was to accept the resignation of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and to ask Liz Truss to assume the job in his stead. We should also ask, however, about the Queen's symbolic power more generally and whether and how Charles will be able to perpetuate or reinvent the monarch's symbolic role in modern British life. So that symbolism was powerful. Symbolism rules men's hearts and their minds, and sometimes their will more than raw power does. And so maybe the kings and queens, because we don't think that way. We're not kings and queens, but maybe kings and queens have thought that. Maybe Elizabeth said, "This is how I'm going to do that. I'm going to be beloved, in their hearts." But
well, and it's always a perspective, because even as Charles came in, I know that's our next podcast topic. He was he was speaking in a way that he was being a generous, benevolent king by rescinding or relinquishing or allowing his rights to go back to the Parliament.
Right.
I mean, there's that, but really, that's the vestiges of old. When if you don't do that, we're going to chop your head off.
Right.
So that's
Yes.
it's not sincere. If
No.
he could get away with it,
it definitely wasn't sincere, and the words were parsed in such a way that they could fall.
It's almost like he has his fingers crossed
on either side. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's not convincing anybody, really. I don't think he's convincing Scotland. I don't think he's convincing Northern Ireland. I don't think he's convincing parliaments. And the Guardian magazine. I always thought the Guardian was kind of leaned royalist, or at least Elizabethan. But this was an opinion page from February at the Royal Jubilee when they were celebrating her Royal Jubilee. And it was an opinion piece by Polly Toynbee. Clearly, Britain loses more than it gains from the monarchy. Let us be brave and end it. The Royal Jubilee would be a cheerful end to a state of affairs that cannot be allowed to continue. Time to return sovereignty to the people. Sounds American, on how that's going on. She goes on to say, this Jubilee would make a cheerful ending to all the royal folderol. What better time to return the sovereignty promised in Brexit to the people to whom it belongs? Elizabeth the Last should get a historic send-off. Her golden coach and crown retired and her 6 palaces opened as fine museums. No tourism is no excuse for monarchy. Versailles gets many more visitors, and so does Legoland down the road from Windsor Castle. In death or abdication, her passing would be an emotive memory marker in every family, the last link to the Second World War, to remnants of empire, and to that old black and white world of Pathé newsreels with their jolly jingle voices. Thank God for the Queen, proclaims the Sun's front page today absurdly. It's doubtful she returns any thanks to Rupert Murdoch, whose lèse-majesté arrival here shattered the old reverence for royal mystique. And so there is, both in England, and around the world, that this is poppycock, and this would be a great time. This is a hinge moment, and let's make this a time to end it all together.
Well, now, she never abdicated, right?
No.
She made her son wait. He's in his 70s. She could have, right? She could. It would have. Now let's just fantasize for a moment.
Right.
It would have been the ultimate mic drop on him to say, I
would have loved
abdicate.
To see that. Oh yeah.
I
there
ended.
needs
this
to
is
be a
over.
movie made
Yes.
where that it's an alternate reality history
Right, where
movie.
she ends it. She ends it right in front of him.
Yeah.
It'd be like a gladiator.
Yeah, and then Charles goes,
You are-
"Mummy,
Mother.
Mummy, how could you?" That would.
That's kind of is the plot line of Gladiator.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it kind of is.
Maximus
yeah.
to the people.
Yeah, it has to be.
Okay, so
Maximus.
it's happened.
It has to be you, Maximus.
It has to be you,
It
Maximus.
has
real.
to be you. Will you do it? No, Majesty. With all my heart, no. That's why it has to be you, right? It has to be you. So as we're talking about, monarchy from a Christian and American perspective, because it's so popular today, I just kind of want to warn Christian people to not get enamored, not get half accepting of monarchy. Well, I guess it could be. It could be anything or whatever. There's great reasons that we are we have a Congress and not a parliament. There's great reasons why people rejected monarchy and chose a 3-tiered system of government. They don't have a 3-tiered system of government. It works very different. I wanted to talk about that last to kind of clarify the difference between a parliament system and a Congress system. All right. Politics sphere actually deals with this directly. Differences between Congress and Parliament. Get this. Congress, like what we have, is the legislature of a federal government. In terms of functions, Congress modifies, approves, or rejects laws and supervises the executive branch. Members of Congress are elected through primary elections. They're elected by the people. They are we the people. That's balanced in states with more population than less population through the Senate. So the Senate is not a Royal House of Lords versus House of Commons. It is just a balancing of population issue. And then we have the electoral college, which is the same thing. It's a balance of distance from Washington, D.C. and time, actually. So people have, no matter what their distance and time, no matter what their population, there's equal representation.
Equal, as best as it could be.
As best as it possibly could be, yeah. So here's the features and functions of Parliament. The word Parliament entails a discussion, right? You parlay. So it's a place of talking. A discourse or negotiation carried out by certain parties. It comes up with the ideas to solve a problem or enhance a situation. It can be defined as a group of people who make or change its laws and decide what policies the country should follow. Functions of Parliament include representing the electorate, making laws, and overseeing the government via hearings and inquiries. Members of the Parliament are elected by party leaders. They're not elected by the people at all. There's a huge difference in who they are, how they get to power, and what they do, what their representation is. Our Congress actually makes a law. They discuss a law and advise the government. So the Parliament and the Prime Minister are really the same thing. The Prime Minister is always going to come from the Parliament.
Oh, yeah,
Part of the Parliament.
Yeah, and you don't elect a prime minister. What happens is that party wins, and they kind of run based on this promise that if we win, this person will be
absolutely.
But they're still making that person. You're not voting on who like our presidency.
Right.
Boris Johnson and now the new prime minister, the female, were not elected like supposedly Biden or Trump or anyone else is.
That's another podcast.
It's bad nowadays because we're like, who are we to talk? Because our elections are going hogwash. But study.com says parliamentary democracy and congressional democracy are two systems of government that utilized in democratic governments. Parliamentary democracy is a system of democratic governments in which the executive branch is held accountable to the legislative branch, and the head of government is almost always a member of the legislature. The parliament is a legislative branch of the parliamentary democracy. This type of democracy is found in Britain and in free independent countries that Britain used to rule. So it's a form of government that's basically including the monarch, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. Conversely, opposite that, this is something different. Conversely, a congressional democracy is a system of democratic governance in which the executive branch is separate from the legislative branch, and the head of government is not a member of the legislature. The Congress is the legislative branch of the congressional democracy. This type of democracy is found in the United States. They have very important differences in that head of state and that parliament. So if you're a monarch, then if you can work behind the scenes, make no systems whatsoever in parties or both parties, you got a monarchal relationship with people in both parties, and you can go back and forth, and royals have. This is historically documented. Making sure that you influence key people within those Tories, or they call them today Labor and whatever, and Labor and conservative parties is what they call them. Then those party members are going to put forth the prime ministerial candidates, right? And then that prime minister candidate has to ceremonially go before and ask the queen. So the queen still can actually be very much connected with the installment of the prime minister.
Right.
And directly connected with these people who aren't elected by the people. So it gives the monarchy a chance.
Right. Well,
as much a chance as the people to affect who the prime minister and the legislative branch is.
Right. So she, in essence, behind closed doors, could create a crisis, or the king now, by saying, if you bring me so-and-so, I'm not going to say yes to them. I'm going to stop.
Yes.
And so
It gives the monarch as much a chance as the people, and probably a
and
better
Elizabeth
pragmatic
probably
chance.
never would have done that, and history proves she didn't.
Right.
But I'm not sure I'm not sure Charles in this new political system of the world, because in woke ideology and these other ideologies, the ends justify the means.
Right.
And so he would, if there was someone that was anti-green, if there was someone that was anti-homosexual, if there was someone that was being presented to him that was by the consent and the will of the people, he might make the argument publicly by conscience, I'm not going to endorse this person.
Yeah, I've read some surveys that says 50% of the population now is, their mind is ready to consider alternate forms of government, even like a military junta or some centralist power or whatever. And I think with all this happening, especially young people in America might actually say, why not a royal? Now, people who are woke don't like the British monarchy because imperialism. It has
Right.
owned that around the world, but
patriarchy.
But if you can make this big bribe, and if you can make this sentimental lie of a show, then people might be willing to go for it.
And now you have multiple generations of people who are now adults who have not been educated on our own history and what we fled from. And so the idea of accepting it, because what they see of it, like we said earlier, it's Disney, it's fantasy. They think, oh yeah, why would we not do that?
Yeah.
Having forgotten the very thing that our founding fathers freed us from.
Yeah. Because unless you were probably born pre-World War II, this is the only Queen of England that you know.
Yeah.
And she has charmed everybody always. I mean, Xi from China and Putin from Russia, they've all gone there and gone through the pomp and circumstance, and they all have great things to say about her, even though those particular people weren't invited to there. And everyone has said that. Oh, she was charming. She was like my mother. She made me feel this and that and all that kind of stuff. So she weighed the weight of her personality, like a Hollywood rock star, right? And it's interesting that those boys, Prince Charles' sons, married American girls. William's wife, even though she's a British citizen, her family all came from the United States to become British citizens and work there. It was a work thing. I mean, basically, she was, more than 50% American in her culture and everything else, and he married an American girl. And then so did Harry, but I think he just wanted to go opposite the sphere, and so and I think that sucked Americans in, over the last several decades. Yeah. I think if you talk to, some college kids on a college campus today, they might know more about the royal family, as far as personalities and all this kind of stuff, and then arguments as to, well, how come that's better than us? Arguments of Congress versus Parliament or whatever. They might be better at that than they are at like saying, well, here's what our system of government is and why it's not that.
No idea. Yeah.
They don't understand the relationship.
It's pop culture.
Or
so
the
they
breakup.
understand it. Right.
Yeah.
It's reality TV.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of like, all right, kids, I divorced your mother, but I'm not going to tell you why I divorced her.
Right.
Because, it would really degrade her. And so you can grow up loving her and everything, and she should thank me because I'm not telling the truth about, all this kind of stuff. And I think that's how America and the Queen are. They always say, we have this special relationship, but it's not marriage and it's not family. It's a divorce. It's a runaway system, And so I guess I would say there's scriptural warnings about kings.
100%.
God said, you want a king. It's a human desire. They're going to take your money. They're going to take your kids. And
there's clarity on the essence of it. There's clarity on that. Now, the Bible endorsed King David. Right. We believe in the kingship. Yeah, that's one of the offices of Jesus Christ, right, as king. But a divine or what's the word? That kind of monarchy, a divine theocracy. A theocracy only works if the monarch is wholly following Christ.
And God offered to themselves. They didn't want it under Saul, and we said we want no king but King Jesus or whatever. But it's clear today. Now Americans knew what they were doing and why they rejected monarchy, but they don't today.
Right.
And so I think that merits the discussion, especially if we want to move on and really talk about Prince Charles. Now the other thing, Pastor Jay, is that we cannot deny that the scriptures tell us to pray for those in authority over us. Right, it says for kings and governors. No matter what your form of government is, there's some tribal leader, some form or fashion, and you probably should pray for their salvation, pray that you can live peaceably, right? So if you're today living under a monarch, or if you're living under an autocrat, or if you're living under some rich oligarchs, or if you're living in a free-for-all anarchic democracy, you know, or if you're living in a federal constitutional republic or whatever, I think almost anybody could have a Bible and read it and have thoughts. It's the difference in under what are those things can you hold it up and then tell other people what it says. You know, the King James Bible kind of elevated the king, whereas the Geneva Bible didn't.
It called tyrants.
It called them tyrants, and they even in the notes talked about antichrists, you know, and stuff like that. And so the form of government is going to make a difference.
Well, you know, the Bible was written in context, right, of its world that it was delivered in. So the idea of representative government is a modern phenomenon. So we mentioned earlier the doctrine of the individual priesthood of the believer. That's a Bible doctrine that existed when the Bible was inspired, when God gave it. But as those doctrines work themselves out into society and have their effect, just like the ideas of the doctrine of grace and the Reformation and salvation by grace alone, right, really worked itself out. So now even this idea of representative government, that comes with the idea that there's no mediator. Right. And so even as we'll talk with Charles, you know, defender of the faith, actually he is supposing to be a mediator between man and God.
Yeah. And that's what happens when you have divine right and your royalty and everything. Is normal folks don't say, I'm God, worship me. Right. But it's, I think, very much temptation when you're His Majesty and you're kind of in that crowd, that's what's going to happen. So that's the warning, is that we really don't want a global monarch, you know, and that's where it's going. So next time, we're going to get together. We're going to talk about Prince Charles, or King Charles III, the next time we get together. Folks, thanks for coming to the Bible Nation podcast, BibleNation.org. The best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works. We'll see you next time.